Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Well, our next speaker is a traveler and one of the most curious and innovative persons I have ever met. His curiosity makes him study a bachelor degree in Genomic Science at the National University Autonomous of Mexico. Increasing interest on genetic knowledge, social construction analysis makes him travel to the Center for Bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania, where he gets his master's degree on bioethics. Currently, he's part of the PhD's program in biological science, where he is specializing on the field of social sciences, history and communications of genetics and bioethics. Also, he enjoys spending time as a professor for several signatures for the bachelor's program in genomic sciences at his alma mater. Please welcome Antonio Alonso.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let me share my screen before anything else. The title of my talk today will be Beyond Ethical, Legal, and Social Issues, Colonial Practices in International Scientific Collaborations. What I want to do in this hour, talking with you and having a dialogue with you, will be to reflect upon what do we have, or what do I think we must begin doing when talking about social issues in genetic technologies. For a long time, we have been addressing the ethical, legal, and social issues of genetic technologies such as genetic modification, synthetic biology, genome editing, and those in the sense of asking ourselves, are they safe? Are they secure for human consumption? Are they safe for the environment? But we have neglected reflection upon social issues such as who owns property of those rights, where does the knowledge has come, and I think that's something that we need to begin doing. Ethical issues of genetic technologies have focused exclusively on biosafety and biosecurity so far, and a little reflection, a little thought has been shed on the issues that I want to raise on this talk. For example, I will try to begin illustrating this point with a debate that spurred at the beginning of the year with the piece of Kavin Sanapathy on January of this year, in which she begins talking and stating why she stopped defending GMOs. And she's doing it with a very specific case, golden rice. Her argument begins by saying that she's not questioning the issues that have been debated thoroughly throughout the years, that is what I just mentioned, biosafety and biosecurity. She is certain that golden rice, it's safe for human consumption, it's safe for the environment, but she's asking and raising the question whether the technology and how it's being implemented is being problematic in a globalized world where colonial practices and post-colonial practices are still a thing. One of the issues that she illustrates in her piece that it's published on Slate was the fact that intellectual property rights might make farmers, make difficult for farmers in those countries where the golden rice is supposed to be targeted to achieve or to get the technology, even when supposedly the technology is being offered for free. She argues that this is not the case. On the other hand, proponents of the technology of golden rice answered and replied to the statements made by Gavin Sanapathy, stating that it's not an issue of colonialism, it's an issue of ideological concerns by Gavin Sanapathy, because last year, and for the last years actually, there has been a question whether scientists should be allied or should be seen or should take part in conversations where extremists political discourses are being taken place, specifically in the context of how scientific discourses were being allied with alt-right discourses in the United States with the rise of Donald Trump. And those people who were replying to the arguments made by Kevin Sanapathy argued that her concern about oh, thanks, Shiam. Those people, sorry, they were saying that Kevin Sanapathy was concerned about those discourses and not really about colonialism and intellectual property rights. If we take a look on the on how has golden rice been developed, we could see that Kevin Sanapathy may have a point when saying that science has developed excellent tools with the best intentions, but these tools might be implemented in ways that are decontextualized and detached from the local realities. That is something that history has taught us about how technological developments are implemented, particularly in the global south. On the other hand, those that opposed to the piece of Kevin Sanapathy pointed out that she was wrong on the intellectual property rights statement. The seeds are being given for free for those farmers in those countries where deficiency of vitamin A is a problem, and especially for those farmers who earn less than $10,000 American dollars annually, which applies to approximately 99% of the target farming community, according to precisely the developers of the golden rice. And this is a fact. I mean, golden rice will reach a lot of farmers. The question is, could it be that both Kevin Sanapathy and those defending golden rice got it wrong on how technology is being circulated around the world in this moment of history? Let's take a look at some of the contemporary issues of genetic technology and agricultural practices. Technological solutions can be useful in very particular contexts or add other kinds of challenges. While few farmers and agricultural producers in developed countries will feel that they are being held tied by any agricultural company, this is not the same on underdeveloped or developing countries. In developing countries, they might feel attached to commercial practices in which yields and intellectual property rights might make them attached to the products that agricultural companies are selling. On the other hand, we can, additionally, we can also see that in history, there have been a lot of efforts to produce new technologies to aid people grow food and grow agricultural products, but that depending on the context, these have been a success or not. Norman Borlaug, when working in Mexico, developed the dwarf wheat that was a agrotechnological success around the world. And that's something that we cannot deny. That's a fact. And that's why Norman Borlaug has been held a scientific hero for saving from hunger many lives. But Norman Borlaug also tried to develop a variant of maize that had the same properties and the same advantages than the dwarf wheat, but it wasn't possible. The reasons might be the nature of maize and the difficulties, particular difficulties from maize, but this was a story that happened particularly in Mexico. And the development of the dwarf wheat and the research on maize held by Norman Borlaug and Rockefeller Foundation was not the only branch of agricultural research that was taking place in this country, Mexico, for during that time. During the first half of the 20th century, there were two major trends on research being held in Mexico, trying to create the technologies and the tools that would feed a developing country that whose population was growing exponentially. On the one hand, we had the agrarian trend, where that was one of the representative scientists working on that trend was Edmundo Taboada Ramirez. He worked on the Department of Experimental Fields and the Institute of Agricultural Research that were governmental institutions. There were public institutions, and his bet was to create varieties of maize through successive hybridizations with local varieties, looking for stabilized varieties, which had a greater genetic diversity and adaptation to the local environment, which were optimal for small farmers and very local farmers, those who farm for subsistency, because these tools gave them the ability to keep seeds for the next cycle of the next cycle, the next year. On the other hand, we had the productivist trend that was sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundations, as many other agricultural enterprises during the first half of the 20th century. And particularly in Mexico, we had the presence of Norman Borlaug, first at the Office of Special Studies, and then in the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement. And the technology they bet on was one that arose through hybridizations of multiple origins around the world, not local Mexican varieties, that sought to increase productivity and reduce the cost of production with the integration of the technological package of the Green Revolution that Norman Borlaug was developing on wheat. And this was an optimal technological tool for those big producers, because it maximized and optimized yield and these optimized profits for companies, which is fine for the companies. But in the end, what happened in Mexico was that the agrarian trend was lost in 1940 with the presidency of Adolfo López Mateos, the president, and followed the socialist era of President Cárdenas, and a president who favored and promoted the productivist trend, giving funding exclusively to the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement. The story of how political forces helped uh, uh, um, helped this story develop, and how money move is something that has been worked in the laboratory. I'm working right now, this social studies of science laboratory of the School of Science at the National University of Mexico. If you want to take a deeper look on that story, and that's something that's some sources I can share afterwards. So one of the most important things that I want to pinpoint on these two examples, these two, let's say, illustrative examples on how technology can reach real world applications, is the fact that there is a synergy between scientists, governments, companies, and society, in which all the actors involved have different takes on the issue, and the power imbalances are different. And this is only looking at a local context. If we looked at the global context, we will see that these actors can be also separated within many other countries that can affect many different power relationships on each other. So what I want to talk now is, what I want to do now in this part of the talk is to invite you to reflect on whether can we really talk about something called colonialism in science, such as it was claimed by Gavin Sanapathy. And I want to do this to give some perspective on what Gavin Sanapathy and opponents are discussing, shed some light on what happened in a country like mine, in Mexico, at the beginning of the last century. Almost a story that began 100 years ago, and that we can see reflected in how technology is being shared and disseminated throughout the world nowadays. And after this, I will come back to the issue of the golden rice to try to give a conclusion on that issue. So let us begin trying to understand colonialism in general. It's a power relationship, yeah, in which the colonizer thinks there should be an imposition of their means in order to help the colonized achieve progress, development, and civilization. This is something that even the greatest colonizers in history, the British empires, understood and applied to themselves. They understood that the people living in the British Isles before the arrival of the Romans were not as civilized as the Romans, so they needed to be colonized. And if we went back in history, they thought that Romans needed to be colonized in a way, although culturally, by the Greeks in order to achieve a higher status of civilization. And therefore, applying what had happened before them in history, they justified their colonial practices throughout the 18th and 19th century, arguing that they were giving the gift of civilization to the rest of the world. or at least the parts of the world where they were having a political presence. Something that might be obvious, but I need to make explicit, is that there is an unequal power relationship between the colonized and the colonizer. But this unequal power relationship is not exclusively seen between the colonial power and the colonized territory. It is also replicated within both of those territories. The differentiation and the categorization of society in classes is something that can be seen in both the colonizer, in which those that have not the opportunity to get sufficient education or economic opportunities might be seen and regarded as people akin to those in the colonized territories. And what happens in the colonized territories is that those that are in the higher layers of the social classes are regarded as those who have reached a level of civilization similar to those that is to that level that is aspired by the example given by the colonizer and the colonial regime. So this unequal power relationship is important to understand that it's not something that occurs only across territories, but within the same territory. And this is something that will be important to understand to understand what happens in scientific colonialism. Third, the third point that I think it's important to understand about colonialism that is of paramount importance to understand scientific colonialism is that the colonized territories must be assimilated without concession. This implies that the cultural ways of the colonizer must be placed upon the colonized territories, including but not exclusively limited to the language, religion, traditions, and so on. This is important because in colonial science, we are as developing countries and underdeveloped countries and colonized territories in science, adopting some of those traditions, and we are not giving any concession. We are not questioning them. And the fourth issue and the fourth element that help us understand colonial practices and colonialisms in general are the extractivism and the domination. The extractivism of resources, whether they are material or immaterial, and the domination of the production cycle and the production site. Sorry, language. And the domination of the production cycle and technologies. So how can we make a parallel of these issues to science? Try to understand colonialism in science. Well, the colonizer first will think that there should be an imposition of their epistemologies in order to help the colonized achieve scientific proficiency, which will be akin to say that they are given the gift of civilization, a phrase that is common in these debates. Yeah. And this is something that we can see on the erasure of the difference and the standardization of diversity in colonized places and other types of knowledge that are not considered scientific enough. Another element of colonialism in science is that helicopter research, where colonizer benefits with no return to the colonized. It's not uncommon to hear uh, people from colonial or from developing countries trying to collaborate or get information or get samples on populations from the undeveloped or developing countries, commonly located in the global south, and not giving anything back in return, not given even recognition most of the times because of the politics of science and the politics of the incentives that are being held in their own country, replicating the colonial structure within the colonizer regime. Another element is that research programs can justify the construction of knowledge and justify the colonial system even further. That is, for example, the racial research in the 19th century that might even be even seen in actuality, not as explicitly, but claiming that there are some health conditions that are exclusive or mostly seen in some racialized populations. So making arguments that can even go into trying to change and trying to cure something in racialized populations, which can be something very problematic, but I don't want to go further in that subject. That's something that also can happen in scientific colonialism. And if anyone wants more information on that, I can talk to you later about that. But the last issue that I want to mention that help us understand scientific colonialism is the extractivism, both material and immaterial, such as the extraction of local knowledge and the incorporation of those knowledge into the epistemological hegemony, and the domination through international property laws, technological dependency, and other issues. And the technological dependency might be the most problematic in nowadays. Yeah. Now that I have trying to describe in general terms colonialism, both in general and in science, let me try to illustrate colonialism in other scenarios that are not agricultural research, that are not genetic technologies, that are not GMOs, which is most of the things that I have talked with 4 examples, with 4 case studies, brief case studies: vaccines, COVID-19, and the Omega variant. That is something quite recent. Access to scientific knowledge, diversity in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and intellectual property rights. This graph from April of this year showed how many vaccine doses had been purchased by income level compared to the share of adult population. So the column at the right, at the left of the graph shows us what's the percentage of global population 18 years and older, separated by the level of income. We can see that 19% of the global population 18 years and older are on the high income level. 37 are on the upper middle income, 37 as well in the lower middle income, and 7% in low income. But if we try to compare these to the percentage of vaccine doses that were purchased by April 2021, we could see that those 54% of the doses purchased by the beginning of this year were intended for the 19% of the population of the world, which means that high-income countries or high-income strata of countries had bought and gathered almost three times the amount of vaccines they needed to achieve protection. While, for example, upper middle income and lower middle income strata were only having almost half of their doses, and low income less than half of their doses, which was the reason why the COVAX initiative was created and had been promoted among countries to gather doses to give them to those countries that have not purchased or couldn't have purchased enough doses for their populations. The consequences of this graph, for example, is this. This is the vaccination rates in the country updated to yesterday. From the map is from covid19trackvaccines.org, which information from our world in data from the University of Oxford. It's quite evident that there is one particular continent in which we have not been able to offer the same degree of vaccination rates than in other parts of the world. And it should not be surprised that the lack of immunity, herd immunity in countries in this continent and these parts of the world have served as a place where variants can appear, or at least that's what we expect from theory, even though the Omicron variant has been identified in South Africa. We do not have evidence that it developed in South Africa. The only thing that happened is that South Africa was the first to report it because its surveillance system identified the variant on time, which could have happened in any other part of the world, but they reported it first. So now we are associating that, and we can begin to think about how the hoarding of doses by the global north can be hurting everybody beyond the cute speeches from our politicians saying that nobody is safe until everybody is vaccinated and nobody is safe until everybody is safe. That's cute, and that's very nice when hearing it from our beloved politicians and presidents. And I mean, I cannot say that we are on the worst case scenario, but in reality is that global north is hoarding doses, putting at risk not only countries from the global south, but also from they are putting themselves in risk. And also the response to these circumstances reflect a discriminatory tendency that has been happened on every time of history. I mean, when we had the highest rate of COVID transmission with other variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus in Europe, nobody dared to make a ban on the global north. They could travel easily travel with precautionary measures. But when the Omega variant arose, countries were quick and fast to ban South Africans from entry to their countries just because they have the decency to report the variant for the benefit of global public health. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that even though we are in theory on beyond discriminatory and racist practices, in practice, we still can see them. Yep. Another thing that illustrates how colonial practices and colonial mindsets appear nowadays in international scientific practice is the problem with accessibility. First, to get knowledge, you need to pay for that knowledge. Yeah. Ironically, a piece on Nature that it's talking about the growing inaccessibility of science has to be bought for almost $9 US dollars, which might be a year's salary in some countries. So just keep that in mind, that a year's salary of a working class citizen in many global south countries is the price for one single piece in Nature. That is not even a research article, it's a commentary. On the other hand, even though we have access to scientific knowledge, we still have difficulties trying to communicate in a language that, first, it's not a native language of many of us, but second, even though if we can kind of talk it, and even though we can say that the international language of science is broken English, and we might have some difficulties trying to express ourselves, and sometimes we might just forget the word and trying to translate from our native languages to English. The fact is that it's an enormous privilege to being able to talk in English for living in a country that doesn't has English as an official or a native language. The fact that people in Mexico, for example, I'm just gonna talk about Mexico when giving examples like this. The fact that people in Mexico can talk and understand and write in English is reflection of those who have been able to achieve certain level that incorporates us in the colonial logic, yeah, in the logic of the colonial practice. And yes, talking about the places where inaccessibility because of financial funds and language barriers appear the most are conferences. And this is something that Gogec conference published in its Twitter account that, well, illustrates the point quite good. There are many awesome scientific conferences around the world on almost every subject in scientific inquiry. Many students cannot afford them. Many scientists cannot afford them. And that is one of the biggest issues that we are facing. And also, this limits who can make science, who is making science around the world. So maybe many of you are familiar with the Draw a Scientist test that is turning almost 50 years now, in which children are asked to draw a scientist. Then they are given a talk about what are scientists, who are the scientists, what do they do, and then they are asked to draw again a scientist to see how their conceptions about who is making science change. When children make their first drawings, and particularly at the beginning of the application of this test in the late 60s, early 70s, last century, they tended to draw in a majority male scientists, kind of old scientist with the stereotypes of scientists such as the crazy scientist, the ununderstood scientist. And even though we have begun to change, and we have begun to achieve visibilization of other kind of scientists in STEM, not only white men, but also women. This chart from 2015 illustrates how there is still a great gap between the demographic in the US, for example, and science and engineering occupations nowadays. Even though diversity in science, technology, engineering, and math is having a great moment, and it's a great time to be making science, being from underrepresented minorities, being from underrepresented ethnic groups, being from underrepresented countries. It's still an issue that we have to address. So, having illustrated, and this may be the consequence of, yes, the societal structure that we have been replicated since the 19th century with these colonial regimes. Now, even though it can be very depressing so far what I have told you, where do we go from now? Is there any hope to achieve better way of making science? Yes, the good news is that there is hope, and there are many efforts to achieve this. First, there are many efforts to change how scientific knowledge could be shared with an initiative, a global initiative to global science. It is not surprise for many scientists in underrepresented countries, developing and underdeveloped countries, and particularly from students, master's and PhD students, that most of the research materials that we get, most of the information are obtained through open science and open science technologies, or even trends such as Sci-Hub, GitHub, Google Scholar, and social networks for academics such as Academia or ResearchGate. But it is only until this year that, for example, an international organization such as UNESCO made a declaration on open science. but last week on November 25th, so it's just out of the oven, UNESCO published a recommendation, a draft on recommendation that might eventually become a declaration on open science that seeks to increase scientific collaborations and sharing information for the benefits of science and society at a global scale. Uh, Also, favoring multilingual scientific knowledge, which is openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone. So it is not an issue of changing English for another language, which might happen if we don't address the issue of colonialism. Now that the power imbalance of the geopolitical relationships are kind of shifting, we might see that uh, other languages might become more used, more popular, and maybe in the future, English won't be the lingua franca anymore for scientific communication. But the issue is not forgetting about English or making English part of the history. The issue is to bet on multilingual scientific abilities and uh, sharing information in many languages, not just English. Yes, this might also impose a burden on technologies to translate ourselves, but this pressure might be a good engine and a good incentive for innovation in technology as well. Yeah, and also the recommendation of open science from UNESCO opens the invites to open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation of cumulative communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. That is to understand that our practices is not limited to other scientists, but also governments, uh, private industry, and society as a whole. Yeah. Another recommendation is to increase diversity in science, not only on gender equality, but also in ethnic equality, nationality, diversity in sexual identity, sexual orientation, and to make disabilities more visible on scientific practice. Yeah, diversity should not be limited or constrained to gender equality, but to many other kinds of diversity, because even international diversity in scientific collaborations might allow scientific disciplines and research programs to find different ways to create knowledge, to construct knowledge, keeping the rigor that we already have placed on our scientific practices to assure that our knowledge, the knowledge that we create, that we generate, is certain, is true, or at least is the truest kind of knowledge that we can get, but from different perspectives, trying to create a true pluralism through the incorporation and participation, not appropriation, of marginalized scholars, local community, and even indigenous peoples, and making sure that they can also have a say in what kind of problems need to be addressed, what kind of things need to be solved to help them understand themselves better, whether we are talking about indigenous people, marginalized scholars or local communities or any other kind of minority. Uh, so going back to where we started, going back to the debate whether scientific colonialism was something that was hurting uh, uh, golden rice, maybe not. Maybe it's not an issue for golden rice because even the International Rice Research Institute, which is also a post-colonial institution that is similar to the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement that is located in Mexico, where Norman Borlaug worked. Well, the International Rice Research Institute is located in the Philippines, and they are also working in the development, commercialization, and implementation of golden rice, because as a tool, it can be useful, it can be a good bet to solve a health problem, an epidemiological problem in many parts, which is the vitamin A deficiency. Don't get me wrong, I am completely pro golden rice supporter, but we cannot forget that there are also many other heirloom varieties in agricultural research that can help us to have different, to solve different problems other than vitamin A deficiency. It is golden rice is only one tool. And I think Kevin Sanapathy was wrong saying that that the problem was that it's not that the companies are giving for free the seeds, because they are actually are. They are giving away the seeds for free. The problem, which no side of the debate identified, and that it's a reflection, it's an instance of the colonial practices that I have tried to illustrate in this talk, is that we are just giving the product to developing countries in need of a solution, but we are not incorporating these countries, Syngenta, Monsanto, Bayer, the University of Zurich, uh, and all the developers of the golden rice from the beginning in the early 80s have not incorporated the knowledge and the technological proficiency into the countries where this technology is intended to help, so that they can they can solve their own problems in their own ways with their own criteria. We are just giving them the gift of civilization through a technological advance that might be very useful, but it's kind of, not completely, just kind of detached. We are just giving them the fish, but we are not teaching them how uh, to fish, to get their own work, making them kind of dependent on the technology that is produced in the global north. And even though both the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement and the International Rice Research Institute have their origins in the intervention of the Rockefeller Foundation in agricultural research in developing countries, they are now kind of independent entities that can take part on the solution. So I think this is the bet that we must do. Open science, open the ways science, the methodology science and technological advances are being made around the world in local institutions that know the local context that need to be addressed. And this might help reshape our relationships within the scientific community and with the global society. A refoundation of these relationships is urgent of paramount importance, leaving behind the triple helix model in which government or public sector, the private sector represented by businesses, and the academia and higher education institutions are the only ones taking part on the conversation. We need to begin incorporating the general public, the civil society, because they might have a say, and we have to begin to address their concerns accordingly to also try to eradicate and avoid the emergence of unfounded skepticism about the technological advances. Given that most of the conversation is being held in without consideration of the local context, without consideration, many of them, of the local context, the society where these technologies will be held, this is creating the conditions to the emergence of conspirations and conspiranoic theories that oppose not only genetic technologies, not only synthetic biology, not only genetic modification, but also vaccines, with the terrible consequences that we have seen now. So this is not only in order to allow every actor in the international community have a say in the way science is being done. Oh, sorry. Let me just go back to, I just ended the presentation. Sorry. Yeah. Not only we want to make them part of the conversation, we want them to make to be certain that the conversation is a benefit for them. And there a reflection for reflections for developing countries, for developing scientific projects, and recommendations to make them a little bit more inclusive and less colonial is an increased interest in local science skills development, not only giving technology to people, but to incorporate diversity in STEM. Epistemological pluralism that retains our current degree of rigor is possible through scientific pluralism. We do not have to yield to epistemologic anarchy and saying everything goes, because evidently not everything goes. But we can make sure that there is a pluralism of knowledge, of scientific knowledge from different origins, that attain and achieve the same level of rigor, methodological rigor and strictness than our most positivist research program ever. There are technologies that benefit and respect the communities where they are developed, and that they do not extract the natural resources, the natural, indigenous people's knowledge, and without giving them back their due share of benefits. We need to create technology that is useful as a tool in synergy with other measures, responsible intellectual property management, to not ignore possible challenges, difficulties or problems, and understand the social, cultural, economic and political influences of the context to be able to work them on better projects and interventions. So having said that, I just want to thank you for your time, for coming to the talk, and I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pepe. I don't know if some of our participants wants to drop some question or comments in the chat. Or if you want, you can also raise your hand and unmute your microphone.
Is there a question over there?
I think no, but
I just
I
got a
have.
message. I just got a private message that
Okay.
there's somebody with a question, but it might become a longer debate, and we don't have a lot of time for a longer debate. But I don't know, maybe you can just, Ricardo, if you want, you might just mention it and make us think for the rest of the weekend, which is part of what we wanted to do here.
All right, all right. Well, thank you, Pepe. My question, or maybe it's not like a question per se, is about, for example, the vaccination of COVID-19 that is undergoing in the world right now. So you talk about the scientific organization, right? And there are, for example, on the multiple vaccines that are available right now. I just mentioned two examples, no? Like the Sputnik vaccine, which is an open source vaccine developed by the Russian government. The Russian government, for example, are willing to give up the list of the patents for other laboratories around the world to produce. And there are the, the pharmaceutical companies' vaccines, right? That they are not willing to release the patent for the fabrication of the vaccines in other laboratories, right? So it's like I think, and this is my opinion, that it's kind of like a double-edged sword. What do I mean? Well, there is certainly some sort of colonialism from, you might think about this, for releasing this vaccine, this sort of open vaccine to other laboratories around the world for developing, but at the cost of what? There are always, and I think that this is I believe my posture, I don't think so, or my opinion, that it's in human nature to have not sort of like a hidden agenda, but some further interest. So this is a point of reflection for all the attendants right here, to look beyond this sort of the material on the constraint of the pharmaceuticals, but also what are the governments and what are the other parts of the society thinking about when they are entering this kind of debate. Because, for example, all right, no, you can produce this Sputnik vaccine in other laboratory. It's far cheaper than most of the other vaccines, but what kind of coercion or what kind of hidden agenda you are in far by necessity in this point, because you need the vaccine, you need to vaccinate your population, you need to produce it. What kind of concessions are they willing to make just to produce this vaccine? And if this is, like a fine line or like a balance, what that we need to think about or to acquire in the sense of what are the compromises that we are willing to take in this part. Sure, I agree 100% with you. All voices and our opinion and all the opinions must be listened in order to get a greater insight on the matter of facts and the problems that we need to be solving. But and this reflection is, what are the concessions that all of us need to think on, all of us need to consider, ponderate upon in taking all these opinions aside and inside of us. And I think that's a very important debate, because, all right, we hear all the people, we hear the opinions, the possible solutions, but we also need to make some concessions. And where are we as a person, as a public entity, as a company, as a government, as a part of the civil society, are we willing to take to embrace all these opinions? So it's not like a question, but like a point of reflection for everyone here to ponder upon it. You know, if you inclusive and diversity, of course, is 100% needed, but also reflect upon us. All right, what are the concessions that I am willing to make this diversity, make this possible, make this part of open science possible? And it's a personal reflection that I think that most of us must start think. And I will cut it right here because I think that the next part of the Congress will start.
Just let me answer a little bit quickly. There are concessions, and most of the concessions must be made by those that are holding the power. Men should concede spaces for women. White people must concede places for diversity in people of color and indigenous origins. So those who have the burden of the concessions are those who have been benefited by the social order so far. That's what we have to think. And let me finish, please. And on the other hand, the concession as a scientific community that we have to make is understand that the openness not necessarily will yield or will make the nightmare of many old-fashioned people true, which is the incorporation of any kind of knowledge. There has been a great development of epistemological ways of incorporating diversity into the scientific body, critical body of knowledge that doesn't involve incorporating anything that is not rigorously and methodologically made. So that might be the hardest part, trying to understand that other ways of doing science besides of the science that is made in the laboratory is possible, and that the colonial practices have been incorporating and invisibilizing those practices. There's a book, and there are many examples on how natural resources from indigenous countries, for example, and indigenous communities, have been extracted to create medicines without giving them the due credit. So giving them back the due credit might be a start, and that might be the concession, saying, yeah, it was not, we didn't champion the creation of aspirin, we didn't champion as science the creation of the contraceptive pill. It was an indigenous country and an indigenous population knowledge that was stolen from them and appropriated. So those might be the first two concessions that we might need to do. Yield spaces and start thinking about other ways of doing sciences, and making a parallel of a phrase that we hear a lot in Mexico, science, where many sciences can fit.
I have a question. So regarding like this inclusion, so how do you deal with a cancellation of like the establishment? You know, the hegemony of, let's say, Western or the unique way of science on alternative ways of doing science that's still like valid, generating knowledge, but that could potentially be canceled.
What do you mean by cancel?
Well, maybe it's not the correct term, but perhaps where, so basically, where the criticism, so immediately there is an attack on new ideas that might not come from like the usual channels of science. You know, like it's not that they're not even like given the opportunity to be scrutinized. It's not that they should be accepted, but they don't even give the opportunity to be scrutinized. So how how do you deal as an individual or as an agent in the scientific community, where you start to scrutinize these and perhaps like, okay, maybe these things are not crazy and maybe we should like look at them without being canceled?
Long story short, okay, long story short, I think I got what you're saying. Something that happened, something like that has happened in evolutionary biology when the extended evolutionary theory began to be noticeable. Those people, those proponents, on
proponents who
yes, thank you, Kevin. People working on the modern synthesis were like, no, this cannot be true. Let's forget about it. And maybe the way, long story short, the way to deal with it as an individual is to be open to understand that beyond the positivist way of doing science, the decimononical positivist way of doing science, there are many other ways to construct knowledge. Understand the social factors that go through the practice of knowledge construction might be something useful to create a more a way to be a little bit more tolerant. I don't like the word, but to new ideas. Understanding that the origin of an idea might be not only be the traditional scientific method, but other kinds of methods and other places and other ways of thinking and other kinds of problems that maybe are not a problem for us, but are problems for many other communities and many other populations. So I think it's the openness on new ways and different ways of creating and constructing knowledge, what we need to pursue in order to achieve a critical mass of new content and new scientific ideas, which do not invalidate what has been done. I mean, we are not trying to get rid of what has been done so far and start all over again. It's just trying to acknowledge that there is more that can be done aside of what has been done so far. I don't know if I made.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, not? I mean, perhaps for the people that is like incorporated in the machinery of like of the accepted, the scientific hegemony, that, I mean, people will listen to you perhaps, but like traditional knowledge that has been used by scientists and like all this extractivism of like immaterial, like at the end of the day. So this idea of like, okay, so these communities, they're not generating knowledge, even though like the hegemony has benefited a lot from.
I think that the issue must be not say, we must not say that they are not generating knowledge, but to try to avoid that erasure of diversity. That was one of the elements that I mentioned of scientific colonialism, the erasure of diversity in the generation of knowledge. And that's something that is very common in these extractivist practices. They are saying, oh, they had an idea, but they didn't need knowledge. We discovered everything because we did it scientifically. They didn't discover the pill, or they didn't discover this medicine. We did it in science, in the laboratory, because the laboratory is the only setting where knowledge can arise. And that's the mistake. That's precisely the erasure of the diversity that helps and benefits colonial practices. And that might be replicated even in underdeveloped or developing countries, that we have a lot of those in Mexico, actually.
Yeah, I think like from a plant science perspective, so I'm a plant scientist, but for example, I don't know how to grow tomato. You know, oh, I'm an expert in Arabidopsis thaliana and I can grow very well Arabidopsis, but if they gave me a grain of maize or a grain of like you know, some seed from tomato, and they tell me like, go and germinate that, you know, I will have to go and read a lot about, you know, like, because plant biology is quite complex in terms of like the diversity, the impact, all the levels that it is kind of, you know, the level of complexity requires so many different fields because it impacts so many layers of the society. And I think like it has to be very collaborative in plant science. And I think like it gets very reduced, very reduced. And it's challenging. For me, it's challenging. You know, you're a plant scientist, you know everything, you know, kind of.
And I mean, you're more specifically, you're working on the circadian circles of plants, right?
Yeah, it's very specific.
And
yeah,
very specific, but I'm sure that if we sought enough, we could find small farmers that might know something about the circadian cycles of plants, given the expertise they have working with them, growing them.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say. We can incorporate those inputs that are different ways of creating science that can be validated, and also retrospectively give credit where credit is due. I mean, in Mexico, Luis Estrada, who made the contraceptive pill, it did it getting insights from communities where the what's the name of this particular kind of John? Sorry.
Barbasco,
Barbasco, yes, exactly. The Barbasco John was being grown, and well, that eventually became a multi-million-dollar industry around the world. Now, how can we give back credit where credit is due, both ethically and maybe financially? That might be another way of making a concession, such as the one that was asking Ricardo.
Yeah, that I think like I think like in my case, we have a kind of like a duty in terms of like, you know, calling or like, you know, mentioning when people are saying like, we discovered this, although they use indigenous knowledge, making the point and like mentioning, say like, okay, no, maybe you didn't, because you actually got this seed from this particular location because that erase like fight that erasing basically.
That's erasing. And would it be that bad? I mean, just an open question. Would it be that bad to say we co-discovered this along with these other persons?
No, it shouldn't. Like, I mean, at the end
it shouldn't be that bad, but apparently it might be.
Yeah, they like, but it's not a justification, but like, I think the machinery in which science has been turned into, I think like really pushes people into, because, you know, your exchange, your material of exchange is papers. And I think like, in that regard, like, you know, the whole system has pushed also science into, like, maybe it's not the case. Maybe I'm significantly ignorant about the history of science. Perhaps it has happened, I mean, for quite a long time, but, you know, like, so the question there is like, you know, this idea of privatization of knowledge, monopolization of it for exploitation, like economical exploitation. I mean, monopolies is what will give you the way to how to say, to benefit from intellectual property. Is like it's a monopolization of the knowledge. And yeah, so
And that's something that we cannot answer alone. We need the intervention of society, the industry, at least the editorial industry and governments, because I mean, we cannot do anything without money. And something that we might want to ask as well is whether we are going to prioritize innovation or profits in our scientific and technological practices for the benefit of who, and with the incorporation of the views of what actors in scientific endeavor. But how to do it, how to change the complete system might be a little bit more difficult, but a good way to start thinking about how to change it is incorporating people that have not benefited and that could give us an idea on how to change that system. Because the current system that you are describing, Ariel, it has been crafted to benefit the ones that already have benefited in the past. So now, how can we take away power from those institutions, creating open spaces, for example, open spaces where knowledge could be shared without a fee that makes impossible for many other people to achieve this kind of conversations? How do you incorporate topics and subjects that are not traditionally incorporated in these type of meetings to spark debate, not to give a definite answer, but to make people go home with the doubt of how can they incorporate better practices or least colonial, not better, least colonial practices into their own way of doing science, doing teaching, sharing information, sharing research, sharing the benefits, etc., etc.
Challenging. We're like in really exciting times.
We are, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there are no definite answers. To get at least a kind of definite answer, we still need to incorporate more people to the conversation. And we are just beginning to do that. So just let's keep and see how this goes, how the story goes. I think that the conversation stretched a little bit. Mario, I don't know what's next now. I think it's the social, right?
Yeah, so right now there is the social plan where people can join the Discord server and then join the voice chat and just chat with each other, you know, chat just socially, talk about SynBio, meet with other team members and stuff like that. Yeah, but nothing with a super strict schedule. The next thing that is a more strict timing wise event will be the team presentation session B, which will start in about 40 minutes. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, if there is no other question, we might just finish the presentation now. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mario. I'll give back the microphone to you, Alex.